Hello, everybody. Welcome to our newest conversation of Let's Talk About Hanford. So, from September 15 to October 15 is Hispanic Heritage Month. This is a time to honor histories, cultures, and contributions of Hispanic and Latine communities. To help us celebrate and offer perspective, we have invited Drew Gamboa, a history PhD student at Washington State University. The topic Drew will delve into today is migration to community, Latinos and Latinas in Hanford. So my name is Sarah Williams. I am in the communications section at the Nuclear Waste Program. And we started this Let's Talk series back in 2020 to cover Hanford related topics at a high level. And we will continue doing so for as long as there is interest and participation from the public. On that note, thanks to all of you for being here tonight. We really appreciate it. And I'm going to introduce my co-host for tonight, Ana Alvarez.
Thank you so much. As Sarah mentioned, my name is Ana Alvarez, and I am part of this great communications team. Regarding tonight's presentation, we ask you to please put your questions or any comments that you may have at any time in the Zoom or in the Facebook Live. After our featured presentation by Drew, our guest speaker tonight, we will host a live question and answer session with you all. You might also put your questions in the chat throughout the presentation, which will be read by Sarah and myself. You can also ask your questions out loud by putting your name in the chat box or raising your hand to be called on by one of us. We encourage questions and comments geared to tonight's topic, which is Latinos and Latinas in Hanford. And if you have any other questions or any other comments about Hanford in general, about cleanup or just ecology, please make sure to email us at hanford@ecy.wa.gov. Back to you, Sarah.
Thank you so much, Ana. Love you. So as I mentioned before, Drew Gamboa is our presenter tonight. So a little bit about Drew. He is involved with heritage and public history projects that have pertained to Mexican American and rural communities of the Pacific Northwest. Drew helped curate a small gallery exhibit for the Manhattan Project Historical National Park that relayed the undertold history of Latinos and Latinas who worked at the Manhattan Project in Hanford. So without further ado, I'm going to welcome Drew for tonight's event.
Hi everyone. Thank you so much for um, being here today. And also thank you for the Department of Ecology for allowing me to present the work that I did at the Manhattan Project Historical National Park. Um, is it okay? I guess I can just share my screen for the presentation. Okay, okay. Thank you. Um, so yeah, I guess uh, folks kind of already shared a little bit about who I am. Like they said, I'm a graduate student at Washington State University. And I mainly research about the history of Mexican origin communities in the Pacific Northwest, and am specifically interested in learning about how children of migrant farm workers experienced education and schooling during the mid 20th century. And also am kind of written and researched about community-based healthcare for migrant farm working communities in the region. So those kind of projects tend to take up most of my time. So I guess I'll qualify what I'm saying right now or presenting today by just sharing that I'm not necessarily an expert on Hanford. Um, but again, I had a really important opportunity to intern with the Manhattan Project Historical National Park, which has one of three sites located at Hanford. Um, I'm assuming that folks are familiar with the Hanford Site. Nuclear reactors at Hanford produce plutonium for the Manhattan Project to fuel the first atomic test and the first atomic, or one of the first atomic bombs that was dropped on Nagasaki, Japan on August 9th, 1945. This attaches Hanford with a complicated legacy, right? It connects Hanford to the deaths of over 60,000 people. But on a more positive note, the park itself partners with the U.S. Department of Energy and broader communities of the Tri-Cities. It helps provide tours of the B reactor, one of the first large-scale nuclear reactors ever built, and also provides other educational and public programming within the broader community of the Tri-Cities. For my internship, I was able to, and uh, I was able to conduct historical research on the Latina community in the Tri-Cities in the summer of 2024. And through that internship, I kind of researched first whether there were any people of Latina descent who worked at Hanford during the Manhattan Project. The questions that I initially asked were how were Latina people recruited to Hanford? What role did they have in the Manhattan Project? And what may their experiences have been like once arriving to southeastern Washington in the 1940s? I'm going to share today the results of that research. But before that, I'm hoping to also share a little bit of a broader narrative about Latinos and what is traditionally understood as their role within World War II. I'm hoping that this expands how Latinos at Hanford can be understood. From the research that I was able to do through the Manhattan Project Historical National Park, I kind of understand that Latina peoples worked at Hanford in a variety of capacities and roles. They also worked in surrounding areas of Hanford. Folks did more than just work, they also became part of the community. People of Latina descent have been in this region for a long time, have worked alongside people from various backgrounds, and have contributed to what makes Hanford, the Tri-Cities, the Columbia Basin, southeastern Washington what it is today. Next slide, please. First, there was a question that someone had sent the Department of Ecology when the event was first posted. Were consulates from Latin American countries involved in locating individuals or families at Hanford? Um, Based off of what I understand or am aware of, that answer would be no, but that might just be because of what I ended up researching or focusing on the research that I did. My project mostly looked at Latinos who lived in the United States or within colonial territories of the United States. Um, but this question did make me think a little bit more broadly about Latin Americans who had migrated to the United States because of World War II. Specifically, Mexican and American government officials were involved in recruiting young Mexican men to migrate to the United States. Next slide, please. The Bracero program. The Bracero program was a guest worker program spurred by a series of binational agreements between Mexico and the United States. From 1942 to 1964, the program brought millions of Mexican male workers, braceros or field hands, to the United States as contracted farm and railroad workers. Between 1943 and 1947, over 200,000 braceros would participate in the program and be contracted to labor in American farms. The program was envisioned to supply American growers and private farms with labor needs while also generating economic development within Mexico from earnings that braceros would bring back to their home communities. In the context of World War II, braceros were one solution to remedy labor shortages within the United States agricultural industry. Labor shortages within agriculture had preceded World War II. This was a time when many people were migrating to cities in the aftermath of the Great Depression. In the Pacific Northwest and other regions of the United States, agricultural production was also just beginning to expand and transition towards large-scale farming and agribusiness. Um, Given the United States' entry into World War II toward the end of 1941, the pre-existing issues regarding labor shortages within agriculture would only worsen. This is a major reason why braceros or Mexican male workers were brought to work in the fields as farm laborers. For the most part, braceros worked wherever agricultural growers needed labor. They experienced the same types of discrimination and anti-Mexican sentiment that Mexican Americans experienced. In fact, braceros would experience exploitation at the hands of growers, as well as hostility from domestic farm workers and Mexican Americans. They were seen as competitors in labor that brought wages down for farm workers in the United States and were seen to cause difficulties for domestic farm workers to organize unions. Eventually, by the mid-1940s, because of the hostile and discriminatory environments toward Mexican origin people in Texas, the Mexican government would ban the program in the state of Texas. This is important to note because it did affect efforts to recruit Spanish-speaking people from Texas to the Manhattan Project at Hanford, which I'll talk a little bit about later. Next slide, please. The Farm Security Administration. During World War II, migrant domestic farm workers, braceros, German prisoners of war, and Japanese Americans who were forcibly relocated because of the war were all housed in labor camps through the Farm Security Administration or the FSA. While all of these groups may have been housed through the Farm Security Administration, their experiences and relationships with their housing differed. For instance, the Farm Security Administration initially had advocated for domestic farm workers' well-being, and for the most part, domestic farm workers had the choice to either use FSA housing or not. For braceros, they may have chosen to participate in the program, the bracero program, but they were not entirely aware of what to expect once they arrived to the United States. After they had been incarcerated in internment camps, Japanese Americans had the option to work as farm laborers to show their allegiance to the United States during the war. However, it can be argued that they did not necessarily have a choice on where they lived during their internment. I wanted to show this slide mostly just to show that there were people from a variety of backgrounds who assisted in agriculture, American agricultural production during World War II, and also to give a sense of, at least through the pictures, of kind of the type of living situations that people would have had to go through, I guess. For the next slide, please. In many respects, the histories of braceros, domestic farm workers, and Hanford are connected. In fact, on the Manhattan Project Historical National Parks website, there is an article by Saul Bautista that discusses how farm workers were exposed to radiation from Hanford's plutonium production. According to the article, from the 1940s to the 1960s, farm workers were exposed to radiation at very high levels due to their long hours outdoors, contact with contaminated soil and blowing dust, and from swimming in and drinking contaminated surface water. This article is important because it connects the Manhattan Project and its aftermath to the health and well-being of farm workers and of people of Latina descent. It broadens how we can think about the impacts and effects that Hanford has had on its surrounding communities. In the 1960s and then further back into the 50s and 40s, life expectancy for migrant farm workers of Mexican descent were considerably low. This is partially due to high infant mortality rates, but also because of the nature of agricultural labor and the challenges involved with migrating from place to place. At the time, the life expectancy for migrant farm workers of Mexican origin was around 40 years of age. Adding on to the article that Hanford downwinders onto the article about Hanford downwinders that Saul Batista contributed, farm workers in the region also had to deal with dangerous work environments due to the lack of regulations enforced within agricultural settings that would have protected workers. Farm workers dealt with the risks of pesticide exposure and heat exhaustion during the summer months. At the moment, the only suggestion that I would have is kind of to balance both narratives. So the narrative, the downwinder narrative that would build into the history of Hanford, as well as the narrative about farm workers' work environments. Both stories or narratives or histories connect with the struggles that Latina descendant working class people had to historically experience, and that many farm workers still experience today. Next slide, please. I'm hoping that those broader, I guess, histories or narratives kind of y'all can kind of connect how that connects to the history of Hanford. I'm kind of moving now more to Hanford, and this is kind of the research that I had done during my research and internship at the Manhattan Project Historical National Park. Um, so the Manhattan Project at Hanford and Hanford's surrounding communities, commonly known as the Tri-Cities, are well known for producing plutonium for nuclear weapons during World War II and during the Cold War. As I kind of shared at the beginning, Hanford has a complicated legacy, but has also changed the world. Hanford and the Tri-Cities also hold rich stories from many diverse and unique communities, where the roots for some people were defined by their race and their ethnicity. During the 1940s, the Manhattan Project in the Tri-Cities looked like many areas of the South. Practices of segregation, discrimination, and racism were embedded into the fabric of the community. Acknowledging the area's past shows how customs and practices of racism can be imported from the American South to communities like the Tri-Cities. Jim Crow left its mark in the makeup of the Tri-Cities today as well. 75% of people who identify as white live in the city of Richland, a city that housed white administrators of the Manhattan Project. A sundown town in the 1940s, the city of Kennewick is comprised of 44% of people who are non-white. Nearly 80% of people of color call the city of Pasco home. This was the city that Asian Americans, African Americans, and Mexican Americans were segregated in during the 40s and 50s in the Tri-Cities. Even as Jim Crow haunts the Tri-Cities today, people from different backgrounds were involved in the Manhattan Project. During the 1940s, Spanish speakers, Mexican Americans, and Puerto Ricans worked, played, and adjusted to life in the Tri-Cities. For the estimated 150 Latinos and Latinas who migrated to work on the Manhattan Project, their presence in the area show how race, ethnicity, and gender impacted how workers were recruited to the project. The different spaces that this modest number of Latinos and Latinas occupied share how instances of discrimination could also become contradictory and unstable. During the 1940s, Latinos show changes occurring within the Tri-Cities regarding race and ethnicity. Next slide, please. First, recruitment. During March and April of 1944, the War Manpower Commission, or the WMC, attempted to recruit Mexican Americans to work on the Manhattan Project. With the intent to bring labor from Texas to Hanford, the WMC's Region 10, stationed in Dallas, Texas, carried out recruitment of bilingual non-manual personnel. Recruitment targeted borderland communities of El Paso, Brownsville, and Laredo, as well as the city of San Antonio. With the help of the U.S. Employment Service, the USES, and DuPont, WMC advertised Hanford job opportunities through Spanish newspapers and local radio stations. In San Antonio's La Prensa newspaper, job listings for work at Hanford listed a variety of work opportunities. Day laborers, mechanics, telephone operators, and engineers, to name only a few. The listing also called for applicants of both sexes and stated that applications for essential farm workers would not be accepted. WMC, USES, and DuPont also contacted community organizations, local businesses, churches, and schools. Only about 60 Texas Mexican Americans, or Tejanos, ended up being hired through all of these efforts. The recruitment campaign was short-lived and abandoned within a few weeks. The appeals that WMC gave about work at Hanford did not convince many Tejanos to work for the government. According to a report from DuPont, recruitment for the Manhattan Project did not consider the needs that many Tejanos and non-white families had. The report stated, quote, "The employment of males only, with no family living conditions existing on the project, was not an attractive inducement to these people, inasmuch as the large migrations of Latin Americans are in family groups. These Latin American peoples were accustomed to earnings based on the combined earning power of the whole family, and the project's rate of wages for common labor for male help only was not attracted to them." End quote. As the report shows, preference most likely was given to male workers in recruitment efforts and hiring within the Manhattan Project for Hanford. These recruitment efforts overlooked the value of close and extensive families that Tejanos held dear. The targeting of single male workers shows how race, ethnicity, and gender operated together. At the time, many white understandings of family were organized through patriarchy, with a male breadwinner dictating family decisions. As the report stated, Tejanos found power within the family collectively. By only attending to living arrangements for single males, the government prioritized more affluent settlement in the Tri-Cities. During the Manhattan Project, recruitment limited non-white families from permanently staying in the Tri-Cities. Recruitment sought Texas Mexican Americans' labor while also ignoring their livelihoods that is based on family. Next slide, please. So I guess moving forward to the folks that did end up migrating to work at Hanford. So upon arriving to the Tri-Cities, Spanish-speaking workers of the Manhattan Project lived in a variety of places. Some Latinos were intentionally segregated, while others were accepted into white living, recreational, and work environments. Spanish American individuals in top positions, like Adolfo Linares, the Pile Project's fiscal director, moved to Hanford from New York City. Born in Puerto Rico, Linares was an earlier person of Hispanic background to move to Hanford for the Manhattan Project. In 1952, the year of Adolfo Linares' death, the Linares family lived in Richland. Coming directly from Puerto Rico, Ivan M. Garcia contributed to the Manhattan Project as an electrical engineer. During the early 1960s, Garcia was part of a Spanish club in the Tri-Cities that assisted Cuban refugees. He worked for multiple contractors at Hanford well into the 1970s and was a lifetime resident of Richland. Next slide, please. In reference to the 60 recruits from Texas, Colonel Franklin Matthias had opposed the recruitment of Mexicans to Hanford because of their racial ambiguity, being neither black nor white. Matthias was an individual who directed construction of the Hanford nuclear site during the Manhattan Project and who also considerably influenced city planning. Matthias had concerns about where and how to racially segregate these new recruits. A 1945 report about the history of the Manhattan Project stated, quote, "The housing of these people represented a potential racial problem in the construction camp at Hanford, but arrangements were made to accommodate them, Tejanos, in a separate camp." End quote. Matthias's diary recorded that these recruits were housed 15 miles east of Hanford, in an area called Little Pasco, an area meant for temporary workers. As these examples show, ethnicity and the line of work that people did for the project directed where Latina people would work and also, I guess, where Latina people would live, essentially. Next slide, please. So housing. So during and after World War II, segregation and prejudice remained a defining experience for Texas Mexican Americans who migrated to Hanford and to the Tri-Cities. Mexican Americans were looked at with suspicion by top officials even before being hired. General Leslie Groves and Colonel Matthias discussed necessary conditions to accept Spanish American labor on the project. This included, quote, careful checks as to citizenship and loyalty before these people were employed, end quote. Additionally, the living arrangements for new Mexican American arrivals discouraged them from staying permanently in the region. At the time, Little Pasco sat east of the main railway area in Pasco, where new arrivals to the project first set foot in the Tri-Cities, and it also was just north of Pasco City View Cemetery. Similarly segregated in Pasco as Blacks and Asians were, Tejanos had been intentionally placed along the border of Pasco city limits. Their living situations demonstrated that top officials did not expect nor encourage Mexican Americans to live in the area for too long. Next slide, please. Okay, so community. Um, some Latinos and Latinas did find senses of belonging in the community. Those that did find belonging often had to accommodate and assimilate into Anglo environments. Um, and one example would be Victor F. Valdez. So, along with his partner Billy Carey, Private Victor F. Valdez appeared in Hanford Engineer Works weekly newspaper, the Sage Sentinel, for the couple's victory in Richland's Jitterbug dancing contest. The article pictures Valdez, Carey accepting their award with the Nas Jive Bombers, a traveling black orchestra in the background. Um, I I do think that this particular picture is really significant because it does show that there were some spaces that could be like multicultural, um, in a sense. And also it kind of shows also kind of like roles as well. I think it's really significant that the black orchestra is kind of in the background, considering who's centered, who's not. Um, Also, being accepted within this particular space, at least for like a person like Victor F. Valdez, um, that prominently kind of requires you to kind of have like be within a uniform or kind of show explicit allegiance to the United States. So I do think that this particular picture is interesting, and it did catch my eye while I was researching initially, just because again it kind of challenges common conceptions within the Tri-Cities of being really really segregated, but there's also particular roles that you can see within the picture as well. Next slide, please. Okay, so continuing with community, Hanford's Boxing Club attracted transportation worker Miles Martinez of Minneapolis and Hanford's own bantam battler Abran Abe Chavez of New Mexico. In a hard-fought bout that he had lost on November 20th, 1944, Chavez's fight with Joey Dolan generated a lot of excitement. It filled the auditorium of Mess Hall 2 at Hanford. Going further, part of the Alpha Upsilon sorority's local chapter, Miss Veronica Vero Martinez, was crowned Valentine Queen for the third annual Beta Sigma Phi formal in 1950. This was 2 years after Vero moved from southern Colorado to work within the General Electric Company's construction division at Hanford. Stories such as Victor F. Valdez, Hanford's Boxing Club, and Vero Martinez demonstrate how people had occupied spaces in the community. Next slide, please. Though it would be about 20 years before a more permanent Spanish-speaking community in the Tri-Cities, Latine descendant peoples of the 1940s demonstrated the unique and important roles that they brought to the Manhattan Project and to the Tri-Cities. In an environment influenced by Jim Crow, these individuals opened doors to understand how race, ethnicity, and gender worked in the area and in recruitment efforts. Tejano recruits demonstrate how white family standards discouraged how non-white permanency within the Tri-Cities impacted Tejano's willingness to move to the area. Puerto Ricans were welcomed into Richland because of their top work positions that they had in the Manhattan Project. Some Latinos were forced to deal with segregation and discrimination, as we saw within the housing that was given to Mexican Americans, while others were allowed to move and assimilate into spaces otherwise meant for Anglo people. These stories demonstrate and highlight the emerging contradictions needed to uphold ethnic and racial prejudice, segregation, and discrimination, and show the changing nature of ethnicity and race in the 1940s, and specifically within the Tri-Cities itself. Um, so that's kind of what I was able to research and write for my internship. I also had the chance to kind of go through a lot of newspapers and find at least early entrepreneurship of Spanish-speaking individuals. So I guess just on the screen, there's I found kind of like particular restaurants that people operated within Richland in the 50s, particular like one of the earlier Mexican restaurants, I think in West Richland, in the late 50s. And then I also kind of talked a little bit briefly about Ivan Garcia's community involvement with like a Spanish speaking club. That club helped kind of with assisting refugees from Cuba who had migrated to the United States after the Cuban Revolution, which kind of gives a little bit more of how migration into the area of Spanish speakers is kind of impacted by broader processes and transnational events or events that are happening in various parts of the world, really. Um, so yeah, this is my presentation. I really appreciate folks that had stayed to kind of listen. Um, and yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Drew, for sharing your research with us. That was really informative and really awesome and a lot of great stuff to hear. So, really quick, a quick reminder to our participants, please keep your questions on topic for tonight's event, which is Latinos and Latinas in Hanford. If you do have questions or comments that are outside of tonight's topic, we would really love for you to email us. We strive for all those emails. So please email us all those at hanford@ecy.wa.gov. So again, that's hanford@ecy.wa.gov. All right, so I think we can start diving into some questions now. And while we kind of wait for some of them to populate, I did have one, and you kind of touched on it there at the end when you were talking about the newspapers, but I wanted to know the different types of materials that you went through for the research. So you've mentioned the newspaper articles and the Sage Sentinel, and I'm curious if you were able to like actually get your hands on those materials, like pulled them from someone's archives, maybe.
That's a good question. Yeah, I mostly worked through newspapers. Most of them were digitized already, so I pretty much just uh, used like a search engine and typed in particular keywords to kind of find things. Um, I also had the chance to look at Colonel Matthias's diary, which has like comments that I kind of shared a little bit in the presentation about um, just concerns that he had in recruitment efforts of Mexican descendant people from Texas. Um, Trying to think of other things that I ended up researching or finding. I mean, like secondary material too. So there's like other articles. So Robert Bauman has an article about um, segregation in the Tri-Cities. I think it's called Jim Crow of the Tri-Cities in the 1940s or something. So that kind of was kind of forming the basis of what I had written. Um, and then also there's another chapter, I think it's in a book called Echoes of Exclusion, that talks about, and that's written by Robert Bauman and Robert Franklin. Um, there is a chapter there that talks about the development of the Latinx community, and kind of locates that um, closer to the mid 60s. So the research that I was doing, I guess, was kind of to add on to that particular work.
Awesome. I quick follow-up. How long did that take you going through all of the digitized materials?
Um, it takes a while. Technology makes things a lot easier, though. I would just say, if there's like a search engine, you can kind of like filter through particular years. If you find like a particular individual, then you can just type their name in, and if there's results of that particular individual, then you kind of have at least an understanding of what they were doing at a particular moment in time. Um, yeah, yeah. And I guess other sources that I did was able to do, I did do like oral history interviews, but those interviews were kind of from people that worked at Hanford, um, like like in the 70s mostly. Um, but those are also part of what I had included in the gallery space that I was able to participate and contribute in about the history of um, Latine people in at Hanford.
Drew, thank you so much for this wonderful presentation. I wanted to tag along a little bit on the research portion of the question. I wanted you to give us a couple highlights of this research. I mean, I can't imagine it was a small project. So, do you have a couple highlights of what it meant to you to study this community that is so important for the Tri-Cities?
Um, yeah. Well, my grandpa worked at Hanford in the 70s into like the early 90s, I think. So I think that was partially the reason why I was wanting to learn a little bit more about this history. And then I did get the chance to interview my grandpa about his experiences. So that was probably one of the more significant highlights. Um, and then yeah, the gallery space is something that I hadn't had necessarily had the chance to do before. So that was a very um, important learning opportunity for me, to kind of get a sense of how to translate written material to something that's a little bit more meant for like a public audience, and kind of considering how public audiences will kind of understand a narrative that's not necessarily through a written text.
And still kind of speaking of your research, so someone on our Facebook does say, good job, great job on that research. And they also want to know what inspired you to take this on as an intern? What was that light bulb moment?
Um, um, I guess I do kind of just enjoy being able to do like archival research. I think it's kind of um, it's fun in the sense like you kind of piece together a particular story through just a lot of different source material. So um that part is kind of just at least like to be motivated and stuff is more just um constantly just kind of finding particular material that kind of leads to other material that would generate a story and also kind of expand that story or expand your knowledge of that particular history. Um, so I would probably just say that it was kind of just based off of that, it's just kind of constantly learning stuff about it that helps me keep going with the research, I guess. Um, yeah.
Drew, oh, did you have any follow-up? Are you good? Can you do more questions?
I can do more questions, yes.
I have a couple. So obviously, the name of our presentation was Latinos, Latinas. But then during the presentation, you mentioned Latinx, Latine. And so for our viewers, I just wanted to make sure that we are explaining, we understand that it's an inclusive term, but can you walk us through, when to use which and what that background on those terms are, if you don't mind?
Um, yeah, yes. From what I understand, uh, uh, using like Latine or Latinx is just kind of like a way to be gender inclusive. Um, a lot of people within the community don't necessarily use those terms, at least right now. Um, and also, yeah, Latine is kind of the one particular term that I think is kind of, at least right now, in vogue. And especially within like academic spaces. I think academics tend to use those types of terminology. In the community, usually the language of Spanish usually privileges the masculine. So usually when folks are referring to um, a group of people, they're going to use O, like Latino. Um, if it's specifically addressed to women, usually it's Latina. That's what I understand. If folks want to add on to that, they can as well.
Thank you so much.
So we have another question. This one comes from our friend Ben. It says, after World War II ended, did immigrants and refugees gain additional support in their pursuit of U.S. citizenship because of their work at the Hanford Project?
Can you repeat that one again? I'm sorry.
Oh yeah, sorry. I know it's kind of a lengthy one. Okay, so after World War II ended, did immigrants and refugees gain any additional support in their pursuit of U.S. citizenship, particularly because of their work at Hanford?
Um, I I actually do not know the answer to that question, to be honest with you.
That's okay.
Um, uh, for refugees, refugees, I guess that particular part of the story isn't. I wouldn't necessarily say that refugees kind of were recruited to Hanford, but I could be wrong. I don't know. Um, the refugees that I found were more like after the Manhattan Project, that moved to the Tri-Cities, um, as a result, specifically of the Cuban Revolution. Um, I wanted to include that within the presentation, just to show that one, that folks across ethnicities that are Spanish speakers were generating spaces together, um, that could kind of be argued to be earlier um, practices to foster a community, I guess. Um, And yeah, as far as like acknowledgments or like recognition for folks that had worked at Hanford, I I know that like a lot of people that have worked at Hanford are like very, very proud to have worked there. And I think that folks that have worked there kind of like for a long period of time probably have had um, specific recognition or um, yeah, like community recognition in certain respects. But again, I'm not entirely sure. I don't have like specific examples.
Okay, on to our next question. What was one of the most unique or surprising facts you learned during this project?
Um, I think I guess there's two. So one would be like the recruitment efforts. So having to find uh, the newspaper article about Hanford's efforts to recruit Spanish speakers. I think that that was something that was kind of significant to for me to find. And then the other one was probably to learn about the how government officials like Colonel Matthias were kind of figuring out how to house particular individuals. Um, I think that those two things were kind of like um, at least for me significant. And then also it kind of at least for me it taught me a little bit more about how um, ethnicity kind of played into at least decisions that folks in power had at that time in regards to where folks lived um, and how they could possibly experience uh, their time within the Tri-Cities when they migrated there.
So we have another question in our Zoom chat. Were the religious institutions segregated?
Um, religious institutions. Again, I probably don't know. Um, so I from what I understand about like folks that are from Texas of Mexican descent, a lot of folks would be probably were Catholic. Um, and uh, within, I guess, like communities in the Tri-Cities, probably in the 50s, there wasn't necessarily like a priest that spoke Spanish. I think the first person that spoke I think it was his name's Father Briones, and I think he ended up becoming a priest for the St. Patrick's Church in Pasco, probably in like the mid 60s or late 60s. So that yeah, I guess just thinking through like if you are migrating from like a place like Texas that has, a lot of folks that are like yourself, that speak the same language, where you can go to the same like spaces like a religious institution, and then migrating over all the way over to here, where that might not necessarily be the case until much later. Um, yeah, just thinking through those types of things are kind of important to get a sense of the types of experiences again that folks within that particular time period would have experienced.
Awesome. We have another question. Was there a question you had going into this project that is still left unanswered?
Ooh. Um, I haven't really thought about that, to be honest with you. I think when I after I kind of had the chance to kind of complete the internship, I was just kind of more um tired more than anything and kind of just let things kind of just rest for a little bit. So I didn't really have the time to kind of like think through like what else could be researched. Um, I do think that like the restaurants are interesting, or at least the restaurants within the 1950s. Just be especially the Mexican restaurant, just because I'm just thinking of like the types of ingredients that um that might not be within this region at that particular time, and where folks would get the ingredients to prepare Mexican food, really. That's kind of what I would, if I were to kind of like build on what I have done with this research, that's probably something that I would be interested in learning a little bit more about.
Would you be able to elaborate a little bit more? I mean, were there no ingredients were not available for some Mexican restaurants and they would have to bring them from Mexico? Is that what you meant?
Or, no, not necessarily.
Okay.
I guess it, in the Eastern Washington in like the 1950s. I'm not sure if there's like any particular stores that would have like particular ingredients that would contribute to preparing like a Mexican dish. Um, in Zilla, which is in the Yakima Valley, there is a store that was like an initial store. It was called El Ranchito, where that was kind of like the central hub for the Mexican community, at least within the Yakima Valley. So I'm just kind of guessing that there was kind of a connection between the restaurant within Richland and Zilla, possibly, but I'm not entirely sure. But yeah, like when folks, yeah, I guess I'm just saying that like there wasn't necessarily like a particular store that would sell um, the ingredients like tortillas or particular ingredients that would be part of a particular like Mexican food, I guess. Yeah. I hope that makes sense.
So kind of the opposite of that question almost is there something you came across in your research that you found really interesting and wanted to focus more on, but it wasn't really within this topic, but you would like would you do more research on a different topic that you found because of this?
Um yeah. Uh like kind of like I said about like the like food. That's something that I think would be interesting to learn a little bit more about. The spaces for like I guess the interethnic spaces that folks generated. So like the I guess the particular example of like Cuban refugees. Um, I think that that's interesting just because that particular club was kind of led by like the Puerto Ricans that migrated because of the Manhattan Project. So I think that those types of things or those types of stories are interesting to see kind of like how how communities being generated across ethnicity, mostly probably based off of language, or like an affinity to Spanish, I guess, or a connection that folks could foster through Spanish. Um, and yeah, I think that those are kind of the things that I would be most interested in learning a little bit more about. Um, yeah, yeah.
So you mentioned Mexicans, Puerto Ricans, Cubans. In your research, did you find any other ethnicities or people from other parts of maybe Central or even South America early in the 60s, 70s?
Um, I didn't. Um, Yeah, I haven't. There are like other material that talk about like and this is in Oregon. This isn't in Washington, but in Oregon there is a book. It's an anthology called Nosotros. Um that does talk about like at least within Oregon um experiences that like Peruvians in Oregon have had, Argentinians in Oregon have had um, and other folks, specifically in Latin America. I think they talk about Cubans and stuff. So that might be like a source to kind of look at if you're a little bit more interested in um, understanding, like, I guess broad community of Latino people, um, um, I guess across ethnicities. But again, that's a history within Oregon as opposed to
Do we
Washington.
have any percentages as far as at that time, this was the percentage of Latinos that we had? Because I know from what I've read, it was very minuscule, right? It was not as big as Mexicans were or as the Afro community. Do you have, by any chance, any numbers that you can share with us?
Um, I guess not percentages. I so at least within the 40s, I kind of just made an estimate of like how many folks of Latin Latino background would be within the Tri-Cities or who migrated as a result. I guessed or estimated like 150. That's mostly just based 150 people that migrated to the Tri-Cities to Hanford for the Manhattan Project in the 40s. That I guess that guess or that estimate is kind of just based off of um, the 60 recruits from Texas that they note within, I think it's within a report about the history of the Manhattan Project. The other individuals from Puerto Rico that are at least within the newspapers, considering the families that they brought with them. And then also like, um, yeah, and then there's also like reports from like the contractors at Hanford that list who they hired. Um, and I think yeah, who they hired at particular moments in time. So for that, I kind of just looked at like whether there was like a Spanish surname, mostly. Um, so yeah, that telephone directories, that kind of gives you a sense of like how many people were here at that particular moment in time.
All right, so I have another question, and I know you've been asked like what was the most surprising thing you found, but I want to know after all of this research, what is the most important thing that you think you found that like really stood out to you? And I know you stopped on that picture at the dance and I really loved the way you talked about the perspectives in the picture and I'm just curious if anything else that you found really stood out to you in that way.
Um, uh, I think a lot of the stuff that I showed, at least on within the presentation, kind of stuck out to me at least, or caught my attention. Um, I guess to add on to that, maybe too, when I did do like oral histories, some folks were willing to kind of share like family pictures. Um, so within that, I think that that's kind of significant, especially so within those family pictures, it kind of shows like um, their grandparents, their parents before migrating from Texas to the Tri-Cities, as well as like the family and the individuals that shared their pictures with me, like how they grew up within Pasco. So I think that those types of things are kind of really interesting. They kind of tell more of a family story, which I think is a really good way to see how um, the experience of migrating from Texas to the Tri-Cities, how that kind of changes um, the way that it changes family dynamics or changes like um, I guess just shows how folks experienced changes from living in Texas to living in the Tri-Cities, I guess.
So we're close to wrapping up, but I do have one last question. You did mention your grandpa, that you had, the honor and the pleasure of being able to interview him for this project. So I have to ask, where is your grandpa from?
My grandpa right now lives in Sunnyside, Washington. Um, he grew up or he was born in Edinburgh, Texas, and was kind of part of the migrant stream within the 40s and 50s. Um, and that our family kind of ended up migrating, at least in to like the Yakima Valley, and kind of staying there close to the late 40s, I think.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Drew. I think we are ready to kind of wrap things up. So, we really, really want to thank everyone for attending tonight, asking questions, and watching. This event was recorded and will be up shortly on both the Ecology Facebook pages and the Ecology YouTube channel. We'll also add the recording link on our website. Any final thoughts, Anna Grisel?
No, I just want to thank Drew one more time for joining us tonight, dedicating this time to talk about his wonderful research and project, and just thank the people that were here with us that were able to attend this presentation, and just let them know, once again, if you have any questions, please let us know, email us, and stay tuned for future events. It was a pleasure co-hosting with you, Sarah, and we'll see you all in the next event. Thank you.
Thanks, Anna Grisel. Drew, before we close out, any final thoughts from you?
I just thank you for allowing me to present, and then also thank you for listening to the presentation and asking really good questions. So thank you.
Thanks for being open to presenting this. I think getting all of these different perspectives is just so important and so awesome. And it was really great to hear your stories that you got out of it as well for the research. So one last time, thank you so much for being here. So I think with that, we can go ahead and close this one out. And thank you one last time for everyone for joining tonight's conversation.